Hi, it's Chris Rue here, and on this channel we're here to help business executives become business leaders. You may be one of those folk who've just set up their own business and just trying to get some great success in employing people. Well, this channel is for you. What do you do to move from a manager to being a leader of others? Hopefully you'll find some help here. Equally, if you've just taken over a new department or you've taken over a new division and you need to move again from being a manager to leader, then this is for you. So today I want to chat about a convincer strategy. And what do I mean by that? Well, this is how have you experienced the scenario? We say, I wonder how I convince people to take my product, to listen to my ideas, to be influenceable, if you like. And the premise of the statement is sort of an interesting one, because actually, how do you convince people of your arguments? Well, people have got to be able to listen and prepared to listen in the first place. So what's the premise? That you're going to manipulate somebody? We don't really want that, do we? But what we do find that is useful is that if we can understand how people make their own decisions, that can be useful for trying to communicate really important messages and how people can be aligned. Because quite often you can find yourself talking apples to their pears in terms of your language. And that's really what we're talking about here. This is about the type of language that's used such that you're actually talking in a language that your audience understands. So when you're talking to those who are reporting to you and we want to unlock their own personal convincer strategies, then there are two sort of components to it. The first is how they data gather, how they get information and how they receive and process that information. And there are sort of four aspects associated with that. And the second part is then how do they use that information going forward? And I'll give you some examples of that as we go forward. Now, I'm sure you've had the situation where you've had a new initiative and you launch it, as it were, at your next meeting. And immediately two of the team pick it up and they run with it and they've got it straight away. But a couple are cautious about it, but within a week or two they've picked up on it, and maybe a couple more seem to be consistently challenging and checking the validity of the concept, which can be quite wearing. Well, it's quite interesting because this does reflect the fact that individuals have their own convincer strategies. In order to be convinced about this idea or project, then especially if it hasn't been brought up by themselves, then we have to understand more about what their processes are. Now, I'm very grateful to one of my earliest book recommendations, actually, a lady by the name of Shelley Rose Charvet, who wrote this great book called Words That Change Minds. And it's a very practical book full of pragmatic tools, which is, I love that. The convincer mode is one of these tools and principles that can be found in the book, and it does help people understand the role of language in influencing others. So let's just get into the meat and drink of that just a little bit. So apologies for the technically bit of it, if you like. But people need to process, as I say, language in a particular way. And in general, there are four different patterns or ways that people first process that information in order to be convinced of something. So what might those four different ways be that they gather that information in order that they can be convinced? So the first one is fairly obvious. If they see a product or a service or an idea in action, then they're more likely, in that particular case, to believe it's true. Or maybe they hear about a product or service or idea. If they hear about it themselves, then they can draw a conclusion. They'll think it's true. If they read about this product, service or idea, well, finally, the fourth area, they actually do try this product, service or idea. So you've got four different metrics here, if you like, that people can use. Now, they won't use all of them, but they may use one or two of them. And when people describe how they know something is right, you'll hear in their language at least one of those four elements in their explanation. Now, that information helps us understand and inform which of the convincer patterns that they are adopting. So we've got how they receive the information on the one hand, but now what's their convincer pattern? So the first pattern is what they call the number of examples pattern. So some people need a number of, they need to receive this data a number of times in order to be convinced. So for example, hi George, how will you know if this new process works? And George answers, well, if I try it for 2 or 3 times, then I will know it works. I might say, so if you tried it twice, then it did work, would you be convinced? And then George may answer back, well, I might have to try it one more time, 3 times probably, then yes, then I'd be convinced. So you can hear a number of times as a convincer strategy for that individual. So if you listen to people's language and hear how they decide on stuff, you can start to understand what their personal convincer strategy is. You can also recognize that there is a do way of understanding. This is the second pattern. There's a second component to what he was doing. So if he does something, then he can learn. The second pattern is referred to is the automatic pattern. So we've got a number of examples, then we've got automatic. In this pattern, people basically take the information they first receive and immediately extrapolate it out and make a decision based on what they believe the rest of that information to be. So they do make quick decisions and they can jump to conclusions. So you may know people like that who just jump to conclusions. They hear the first part and they go, yep, that'll be fine. They can appear quite trusting. So it's interesting to note, and there sometimes you can see that mistakes can get made. So for example, Sam, how do you know if the new interview process works? And Sam replies, well, I've only got to see it and experience it once. That's all. So I go, once? Yeah, once is fine. I can tell straight away. So Sam has an automatic convincer strategy. In this case, with 2 components, seeing and doing, to help them be convinced. I only have to see it once. People with an automatic pattern are very hard to shift from their position because they are significantly internally referenced, or self-referenced is another phrase. So you bear in mind when you're trying to influence somebody in that space, then you need to let them come to their own conclusions. The third pattern is consistent, and consistent pattern people, they operate a pattern that actually isn't very consistent in as much as they're never completely convinced of an argument, so they're consistently challenging it. So John, how do you know if this process works well? Well, Chris, I check the line regularly at different places. How many times do you check the line? Well, each section is different, so every day, because there can always be a mistake somewhere down the line, so I've got to check it every day, and that's what I do. So John needs to experience the line in action regularly and is never really convinced once and for all about the process. So again, you've got a different pattern going on, and you may have 1 or 2 Johns there who just don't trust that this will always work, for example. The fourth and last pattern is known as the period of time pattern. And in this pattern, people need to gather information over a period of time. So, for example, Gillian, how long do you need to work with somebody to be convinced that they do a good job? And she might say, well, at least a month. If I heard about her work from my colleagues over that time, then I'd pretty much know that she was good. So I may say back to her, if you worked with Jane for a month, you would be convinced about her ability to do the job? Yes. So in that very simple example, you can see a mixed convincer pattern of the do and the hearing over a period of time. So hopefully that gives you some insights about convincer strategies and about the sort of 4 different ways that people decide on things. And by understanding the people around you, your peers, your colleagues, even your superiors, and listen to the conversation of them as they are going about their everyday business, you can practice understanding their leadership styles and their influencing styles by hearing what they have to say. And then if you choose to match with those team members their styles of language, you may be amazed about how much more easily they become convinced of your product, your service, or your idea. For people who need time, match that time. If they need a number of examples, then suggest they do that number. And for consistent people, ask them to try something for themselves. Look for consistent performance so they can bench test the process, if you like. Every time you use this process, decide for yourself what you think is a phrase that you might use. For automatic people, you can assume that the rest of this process works like this, bang, bang, bang. Well, they're going to take that on trust. You can decide right now if George has endorsed it. You can trust it. You can hear that word trust for these automatic folk. It's quite strong for them. And lastly, you might also notice that convincer strategy you tend to use all the time in yourself when you're trying to convince your team. And notice whether you're leaning into one of them far too much and you're not thinking about the others. There is a guide in terms of distribution, and according to data that was recorded by a guy called Roger Bailey, who created the Learning and Behaviour Profile, working with Leslie Bandler, who is a very well-known architect of NLP, approximately 52% of people are convinced by a number of examples. 8% of people are automatic, so a relative minority. 15% are consistent, and 25% are convinced by a period of time. So hopefully that's useful information. Anyway, let me know how you get on with it. I hope it's been helpful to you. Do try out this approach and listening, and maybe engage your team. You could even have an interesting conversation with the group about understanding what everybody's convincer strategy is. That might be quite an interesting conversation to have, and see what people then help people understand why and how they as a group make decisions. But by adopting this, you can definitely build relationships and rapport with your staff and your people around you, and you will be able to improve the quality of the message and the alignment that you can get by improving your understanding of language. So I hope this is helpful, and I wish you well with it. If you've enjoyed this and would like to get some more tips and techniques, then please do go to chrisrue.com, where you'll find some more of these things that I've picked up over the years. And in the meantime, I wish you well, and thank you again for helping me help you become the leader that you want to be. Bye for now.